The execution bells rang 3 times through the market square, a sound that sent every soul to their knees. Nobles in silk, merchants in leather, beggars in rags, every soul except one. An 8-year-old flower girl in a dirt-stained dress continued arranging wildflowers in her small wooden cart, her hands moving gently through yellow blooms and purple petals, completely unaware that she was writing her own death sentence with every second she remained standing. The royal guards froze in horror. The crowd held its collective breath. And Draven Blackthorn, the immortal vampire king who had ruled through fear for 3 centuries, raised his silver sword above the small figure kneeling before him, her innocent eyes turned upward. The blade gleamed in the afternoon sun as it arced downward, then stopped, just stopped, mid-air. Because when the king looked into the girl's eyes, he saw something that had been extinct for 200 years, something he'd last seen in his daughter's face moments before she was murdered. Golden threads of light that no mortal should possess, the true light. And in that frozen moment, with his sword trembling inches from her neck and the entire kingdom watching, everything Draven Blackthorn believed about justice, about power, about the nature of mercy itself, shattered like glass. What happened next would resurrect a kingdom drowning in darkness. Hello, friends. Welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We want to know. The shadow-touched kingdom of Blackthorn had forgotten the color of hope. Elara Moss was 8 years old, and she had lived her entire life in silence, a world where sound didn't exist, but color and light spoke in ways no one else could hear. She was the granddaughter of Miriam Moss, an elderly woman who sold herbs and remedies from a cramped cottage on the edge of the capital, who kept her head down in a world that didn't notice the poor unless they broke the law. Elara didn't mind being silent most of the time. It meant she could see things others missed, the shimmer of auras around people, the way emotions painted the air in shades of blue and gold and crimson. Her grandmother told her it was just imagination, her mind's way of filling the emptiness left by her missing hearing. But late at night, when Miriam thought Elara was sleeping, the old woman would whisper prayers to gods long forgotten, begging them to keep the child's gift hidden. Today was different, though. Today was market day, and the weekly procession of King Draven Blackthorn through the square. Elara had been told to stay home. Her grandmother's weathered hands had signed the warning with unusual force, but the wildflowers she'd gathered from the forbidden forest edge wouldn't sell themselves. Their family needed the coin. So Elara had slipped away before dawn, her small wooden cart bumping over cobblestones to claim her usual corner near the fountain. She arranged her flowers with careful precision. Yellow sunbursts, purple meadow blooms, white daisies that still held morning dew. Around her, the market thrummed with energy she couldn't hear but could feel through vibrations in the stone beneath her knees. Merchants shouted prices she'd never know. Children laughed in a language of sound she'd never speak. But Elara had her flowers, and her flowers had color, and color was a language all its own. The crowd's movement changed. Elara noticed it in her peripheral vision. A ripple of motion, everyone turning in the same direction. She looked up from her arrangements and saw it, the royal procession approaching down the main avenue. Even from this distance, the sight was magnificent. Guards in black armor marched in perfect formation. Nobles on horseback, their silk banners catching the wind. And at the center, mounted on a massive black warhorse, was a figure in burgundy and gold. Draven Blackthorn, the Vampire King, the tyrant of Blackthorn. Ilara had seen him before, always from a distance, always in passing. But she'd never been this close during a procession. She studied his face, pale as moonlight, framed by platinum hair that flowed past his shoulders. His eyes glowed an unnatural crimson red, marking him as something other than human, something eternal, something dangerous. But it was his aura that held Ilara's attention. Where most vampires she'd glimpsed from afar radiated hungry reds and violent purples, Draven Blackthorn's aura was different. It wasn't the monster red she expected. It was deep, drowning blue, an ocean of grief so profound it made her chest ache. The procession drew closer. Ilara noticed the crowd doing something strange. They were sinking downward, one by one, like flowers folding at dusk. She didn't understand why. She couldn't hear the ceremonial bells that rang 3 times. Couldn't hear the guards shouting the command that every citizen knew by heart. On your knees before the king. She was too focused on the flowers. The purple blooms needed to be in front, she decided. Yellow ones in the back for contrast. She reached for her cart, rearranging, completely oblivious. The market square fell deathly silent. 200 people knelt on cobblestones. 200 people held their breath. One small girl, in a dusty pink dress, remained upright, her hands moving gently through wildflowers, her face serene, in concentration. A guard shouted something. Ilara saw his mouth moving, but heard nothing. She looked up, confused by the panic in his expression. Why was everyone staring at her? Why were they all on the ground? And then she saw him. Draven Blackthorn had dismounted. He was walking toward her, and his hand was moving to the silver sword at his side. The crowd's terror was visible now, mothers covering their children's eyes, men looking away, nobles watching with morbid fascination. The king's crimson eyes locked onto Ilara. His face was carved from fury, from centuries of enforced submission, from a grief that had long ago hardened into cruelty. The bowing law was absolute. Defiance meant death. It had always meant death for 200 years, since the day his daughter was murdered, and his heart turned to stone. His sword cleared its sheath with a sound Ilara would never hear, the singing of steel, the whisper of promised death. He raised it high, the blade catching sunlight, casting shadows across the small figure who finally understood something was wrong, but not what, not why, not how to fix it. Ilara looked up at the towering figure above her. Their eyes met, and something impossible happened. Through her true light gift, Ilara saw past the monster, past the tyrant, past 3 centuries of accumulated rage and pain. She saw a father who had lost everything and spent 200 years trying to fill the void with fear, because fear was easier than grief. She saw the shadow of a young girl dancing in his aura, a memory, a ghost, a daughter who had laughed once in halls, now silent. And Draven Blackthorn, immortal king, eternal ruler, saw something in the flower girl's eyes that stopped his heart. Golden threads, the true light, the gift his daughter Seraphina had possessed, the gift that had been extinct for 2 centuries, the gift that revealed truth when everyone else spoke lies. The sword stopped mid-air. His hand trembled. 300 years of absolute control shattered in a single moment. The entire kingdom held its breath and waited to see what happened next. Ilara woke to 3 stomps, her grandmother's signal. Market day meant survival. She grabbed her basket before dawn, heading to the forbidden forest, where wildflowers somehow still bloomed despite 2 centuries of shadow magic. The flowers sang in color, not sound. She'd never known sound, but in shimmering auras. Yellow sunbursts hummed joy. Purple blooms whispered secrets. White daisies glowed innocence. Grandmother called it imagination. But Alara saw Miriam praying late at night. Keep her hidden. By sunrise, her cart overflowed. She claimed her spot near the fountain. Around her, the capital stirred. Above, iron cages hung with skeletal remains. The bowing law, 3 bells. Everyone kneels. No exceptions. The king's daughter was murdered 200 years ago. His grief became their prison. Alara nodded when Miriam explained. She'd never heard bells. The crowd shifted. Draven Blackthorn rode a massive warhorse, platinum hair streaming. His aura stopped her breath. Not hungry red, but drowning blue. Grief with physical weight. People sank to their knees. Alara didn't know why. Couldn't hear bells ringing 3 times. Couldn't hear guards shouting. Couldn't hear gasps when she remained standing, arranging yellow blooms. A guard's mouth opened, screaming. Alara looked up, confused. Draven dismounted, walking toward her, hand on sword, face carved from fury. The blade rose high, caught sunlight. Their eyes met. Time stopped. Through her gift, she saw past the monster, someone who'd lost everything. A young girl danced ghost-like in his aura. Draven saw golden threads in her eyes. The true light, his daughter's gift, extinct 200 years. The sword trembled, frozen inches from her neck. How can you see? Draven whispered. The market froze. Guards paralyzed. Nobles staring. Alara clutched blooms, not understanding the silence or terror. She only knew this terrifying figure carried an ocean of sadness so deep she could drown. For the first time in 2 centuries, Draven felt something other than rage. The true light blazed like dawn, breaking endless night. Every instinct screamed to strike, but his hand wouldn't move. The sword hung between execution and mercy, between past and future, between tyrant and father. The flower girl smiled. Innocent. She saw him, past crown and cruelty to the father underneath. Standing with his sword frozen above an 8-year-old who couldn't hear condemnation, who saw colors where others saw monsters. Draven felt the first crack in 2 centuries of ice. Her smile didn't fear, it pitied. The sword lowered, inch by inch, pointed at cobblestones. Stand down, Draven commanded. Bring her to the castle. The market erupted. Lord Cassius's mask remained firm. The true light had returned. Miriam pushed through, signing desperately. What did you do? Alara signed back. I arranged flowers. His sadness hurts. Draven's hand extended. Slowly, Alara placed hers in his palm. The true light pulsed. Your name? Alara Moss. I sell flowers. Guards moved forward to escort, not execute. As Alara walked beside the vampire king, clutching wildflowers, she saw his aura shift to something lighter, the color of change. Behind them, Lord Cassius's hand moved to the shadow mark beneath his sleeve. Dark magic wielded 2 centuries, the magic that killed Lightweavers. The flower girl would have to die. The throne room swallowed Alara whole. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into darkness. Black marble columns rose like giant bones. Stained glass windows cast blood-red light across floors, polished to mirrors. Oppressive grandeur built to make humans feel powerless, insignificant. Guards gripped her arms, firm but uncertain. They'd seized her from the market, but something in their eyes said they didn't understand why she still breathed. Draven sat on his iron throne, crown of thorns catching firelight. Around him, nobles in silk whispered behind pale hands. The council of elders occupied carved seats, ancient vampires with eyes like winter. "Execute her," a counselor in crimson robes demanded. "Protocol requires it." "She's a child," another said, though his tone suggested this changed nothing. The law makes no exceptions for age or ignorance. Ilara watched mouths moving, understanding nothing. The true light showed her their auras. Hungry reds, calculating purples, cold greys. Then the throne room doors burst open with sound she felt through vibrations. Miriam. Her grandmother ran forward, dropping to her knees, hands signing frantically even as she spoke words Ilara couldn't hear. "My lords, please. She's deaf. She couldn't hear the bells." The throne room erupted. Nobles gasped. Guards stepped back. "You're Miriam Moss," a counselor said slowly. "The healer who disappeared 40 years ago. I fled to survive." "Explain yourself." Miriam's hands shook as she signed. "I'm sorry, little flower." Then she faced the council, spine straightening. "I am a descendant of the Light Weavers." The throne room fell silent. "Impossible," someone whispered. "They're extinct." "My family survived the massacre 200 years ago. We hid, passed down knowledge through generations." Miriam's voice cracked. "My granddaughter inherited the gift." "Lies," a counselor spat. "Convenient lies to save the child." Draven raised one hand. Silence fell instantly. "There is a way to know." His gaze moved to shadows. High Priestess Selene. A figure emerged, a vampire so ancient, her skin was translucent, her eyes pure white. She moved like mist. "The child has the gift," Selene said, voice like dry leaves. "I can smell it." "Test it," Draven commanded. The ceremony was simple. Selene brought nobles forward one by one. Ilara, through Miriam's translation, described what she saw. Woman in emerald silk. Aura, flickering between green envy and yellow hunger. Man with silver hair. Purple ambition, wrapped around cold calculation. Elderly vampire. Grief and regret in muted greys. Every reading was accurate. Gasps echoed. Then Cassius stepped forward, smiling pleasantly. "Test me, child. What do you see?" Ilara looked through her gift. At first, just polished crimson, controlled power, but underneath, shadow flickered. Not an aura, but absence of light. Darkness moving like smoke. Her hands signed uncertainly. "Something's wrong." Shadow inside light. Like he's hiding something cold. Cassius's smile never wavered. The child sees shadows everywhere. Hardly proof. But Selene watched him with ancient eyes. The true light reveals what is hidden, always has. The council erupted. Some saw hope, light weavers returning, balance restored. Others saw threat, extinct power returning to judge, expose secrets. "Execute her," one demanded, "for the kingdom's safety." "Enough." Draven's voice cut like his blade. He descended throne steps with predatory grace. He knelt before Ilara, immortal king, kneeling to an 8-year-old flower girl. He signed crudely, but earnestly, "Can you truly see souls?" She nodded. "What do you see in mine?" She looked past crimson power to drowning blue underneath, past tyrant to father, past 2 centuries of rage to the man who'd once been kind. Her hands signed carefully. "I see someone who loved, who lost, who forgot how to be anything but angry because anger is easier than sadness. But the love is still there, buried, like flowers under snow." A sound escaped Draven, half laugh, half sob, the first genuine emotion in 200 years. She will remain here, he declared, rising, under my protection. Anyone who harms her answers to me personally. The council fell silent. Lord Cassius's pleasant mask never slipped, but deep in his aura, Ilara saw shadow, coiled tighter, planning, calculating, and she wondered what terrible darkness he was hiding. The quarters they gave her were beautiful in the way a gilded cage might be, silk curtains the color of storm clouds, a bed large enough to drown in, windows that overlooked gardens where nothing grew. The guards outside her door were for her protection, they said. Ilara wasn't stupid enough to believe that completely. She was sitting on the floor, tracing patterns in the thick carpet, when Draven knocked. Actually knocked, like she might tell him no. When she opened the door, he stood there looking profoundly uncomfortable, as if he'd forgotten how to be anything other than terrifying. "I thought," he said, then stopped, started again. "We should speak." It went about as well as a conversation between a deaf girl and a man who hadn't had a real conversation in 2 centuries could go, which is to say, terribly. He spoke words she couldn't hear. She signed responses he couldn't understand. They stared at each other across an unbridgeable gulf until Miriam arrived, took one look at the situation, and sighed the sigh of someone long suffering. "Your Majesty," she said, "if you're going to insist on this, at least learn to communicate properly." So Miriam taught him. Basic signs, simple words. His hands were awkward at first, unused to gentleness, but he was surprisingly patient. When he finally managed to sign "sorry" correctly, something in Ilara's chest loosened slightly. Then he told her about Seraphina, his daughter, his little light. She'd had the true light gift too, could see truth in people's hearts, help him rule justly. He signed clumsily, but Ilara understood the way his hands trembled on her name, understood the grief that had calcified into 200 years of cruelty. Seraphina had been assassinated during a public appearance, just collapsed, no warning, no visible wound. Draven had held her as she died, felt the light fade from her eyes, and something in him had broken so completely it had never healed. "I became," he signed slowly, "what I swore never to be." Ilara reached out without thinking, took his cold hands in her warm ones. The true light responded, not to her will, but to something deeper, compassion perhaps, or recognition of shared loss. Golden light bloomed between their joined hands, and suddenly they were falling into memory. Seraphina's last day. Draven saw it again through Ilara's gift, but this time something was different. There, in the corner of his memory, shadows that didn't belong. There, the timing of events that didn't align. There, positions of people that made no sense. Ilara's hands moved urgently. "Bad shadow man." There. Draven didn't understand, not fully, but doubt planted itself in his mind like a seed in dark soil. That night, the shadows came for her. Ilara woke to wrongness in the air, a coldness that had nothing to do with temperature. The creature that slid through her wall was smoke and malice. Shadow, given terrible purpose. She backed into the corner, light instinctively flaring around her hands as the thing advanced. Then Draven was there, faster than anything human had right to be, placing himself between her and death. He fought like something ancient and terrible, all predatory grace and inhuman strength, but shadow magic was different from physical threats. The creature flowed around his attacks, reforming, relentless. Ilara's fear crested like a wave. The true light burst from her in a defensive wave of golden brilliance, and suddenly the shadow was solid, vulnerable. Together, they destroyed it. but it dissolved before they could capture it, leaving no evidence except the truth they both knew. The threat was inside the castle walls. Morning brought Miriam and investigation. She recognized the shadow magic from family records, oral histories passed down through generations of light weavers. This was the same magic that had killed her people 200 years ago, the same magic that had killed Serafina. When they tested the guards assigned to protect Ilara, the captain had faint shadow residue clinging to his aura. Cassius's influence ran deeper than anyone had suspected. They couldn't trust anyone. From somewhere in the castle's shadows, Cassius watched and planned his next move. Training with Miriam was nothing like Ilara had imagined magic would be. There were no wands, no dramatic incantations, just focus, intention, and the true light, responding like a faithful friend. Each day it grew stronger, more responsive, until the afternoon she accidentally touched an ancient sword mounted on the training room wall, and suddenly she wasn't herself anymore. She was a soldier. No, many soldiers. Centuries of battles flashed through her mind in violent succession. Every hand that had gripped this blade, every life it had taken or saved. When Miriam pulled her back, Ilara was shaking. Psychometry, Miriam breathed, wonder and concern warring in her expression. Seeing the past through objects, this was the rarest gift, child. Even among elder seers, few possessed it. Draven, watching from the doorway, went very still. Ilara saw the calculation in his eyes, the hope he was afraid to voice. You could see it, he said quietly, the truth of what happened. The private vault was less a room than a shrine. Serafina's belongings had been preserved perfectly, a daughter's life frozen in time by a father's grief. Draven moved through the space like a ghost himself, touching things with reverence. A worn book of poetry, a half-finished embroidery hoop, dancing slippers that would never dance again. He lifted the crown with trembling hands, small, delicate, wrought with silver light flowers. She wore this, he signed, the day she died. Ilara took it carefully. The moment her fingers touched the metal, the world shattered into vision. She was Serafina, standing on the palace balcony, sunshine warm on her face. The crowd below was a sea of hope and joy, and through the true light she could see their hearts, their dreams for their children, their gratitude for her father's justice, their love, such love. She raised her hand in greeting, light dancing around her fingers, and the crowd cheered. Then, wrongness, shadow where there should be none, sliding through royal guards like smoke through silk. Serafina's true light flared defensively, instinctively, illuminating everything. The assassins solidified, revealed. Uncle Cassius, his face was cold calculation, void of any love she'd always believed lived there. The shadow blade in his hand was darker than absence, and in the split second before it struck, understanding crashed through her. Betrayal, not from enemies, but from family. Uncle Cassius, her last words, spoken in confusion and hurt. Then darkness, final, complete. Ilara crashed back into her own body, gasping and crying. Her hands moved frantically, signing what she'd seen. But the most important detail was simplest. She traced a ring on her finger. The Blackthorn signet. Only two people wore that ring, Draven and Cassius. She watched understanding break across Draven's face like dawn, or like dusk, destroying everything he thought he knew. His brother, his trusted advisor, his closest companion through 2 centuries of isolation. The grief was instantaneous and enormous, but beneath it ran something more terrible. Realization. Every cruel law had been Cassius's suggestion, whispered with concern for security. The bowing protocol that separated king from people, Cassius's idea, for proper respect. The isolation, the paranoia, the slow transformation into a tyrant, all carefully cultivated by the man who'd killed the one person who could have prevented it. Cassius had created the monster, had spent 200 years shaping Draven into the very thing Seraphina had helped him never be. "We need evidence," Miriam said quietly. "Careful exposure. If we accuse without proof—" "The blood moon," Draven interrupted, his voice hollow. 3 days. The prophecy said a light weaver would return by the blood moon. And Cassius, they all understood, would make absolutely certain this light weaver didn't survive to see it. The castle had hidden passages Ilara never would have guessed existed, servants' corridors and secret routes built during more paranoid centuries. She and Miriam moved through them like ghosts, gathering evidence while Draven maintained his public facade of cruel indifference. The documents they found were damning. Every brutal law had Cassius's elegant handwriting in the margins. Majesty, for security, and perhaps it would be wise. 200 years of suggestions, each one making Draven more isolated, more hated. Financial records showed payments to council members, bribes disguised as gifts, loyalty purchased with gold, and promises. An elderly servant, ancient even by vampire standards, remembered the night of the Lightweaver massacre. "Lord Cassius was gone that evening," she whispered. "Said he was visiting the eastern province, but I saw him return at dawn with shadows clinging to his cloak like living things." The pattern emerged like a constellation, each point of light revealing the larger picture. Cassius had orchestrated the massacre to eliminate those who could see through dark magic. He'd manipulated vampire-human tensions to provide cover. And Seraphina, she'd been killed because her gift was strengthening, growing toward the power that would have inevitably revealed his corruption. Miriam found the worst evidence in a hidden chamber beneath Cassius's quarters. Ritual circles, forbidden texts, residue of dark magic feedings. He'd been consuming shadow magic for centuries, growing stronger while pretending loyalty, waiting for the perfect moment. "The blood moon," Miriam said, tracing the astronomical calculations. 3 days, when dark magic reaches its peak. That's when Cassius would strike, a beloved uncle liberating the kingdom from a tyrant king. Except Draven wasn't supposed to be redeemable. Ilara had disrupted 2 centuries of careful planning. The emergency council session was called the next morning. Ilara watched from a hidden alcove as Cassius moved through the chamber like a conductor before an orchestra, each word precisely placed. "The Lightweaver is a dark magic threat. Our laws are clear. Public execution during the Blood Moon Festival, a symbolic cleansing." The council members nodded. How many had Cassius bought? How many genuinely believed his lies? It didn't matter. They had the votes. Draven sat on his throne, face carved from ice, and Ilara's heart broke watching him. If he refused, civil war. If he complied, she died, and Cassius won anyway. The trap was perfect. That night, Miriam came to Ilara's quarters with tears in her eyes. "Your mother," she signed slowly, "was my daughter." The story spilled out. The last trained Lightweaver healer, besides Miriam herself. She'd fallen in love with a human merchant, gotten pregnant despite the dangers. 8 years ago, during a difficult childbirth, she'd needed help. But the healer who finally came was incompetent, and by then, it was too late. Cassius's agents, Miriam signed, hands shaking. They ensured she received no proper care. I didn't understand then. I thought it was tragedy. but it was murder, part of his campaign to eliminate every Lightweaver who remained. Elara understood, with terrible clarity. This wasn't just about stopping Cassius. This was generations of vendetta. 200 years of systematic elimination, her mother's death part of a pattern stretching back to Seraphina's assassination. 3 days until the Blood Moon Festival. 3 days to expose a conspiracy or lose everything. In hidden rooms throughout the city, messages were sent to those who remembered the old ways. Lightweaver descendants who'd hidden their heritage. Humans who'd suffered under laws, Cassius suggested. Vampires who'd seen their king's grief twisted into tyranny. Time was running out, but they weren't going to face it alone. The blood moon rose like a wound in the sky. The entire kingdom had gathered in the grand square, the same square where Seraphina had died 200 years ago. Cassius's symbolic choice. They all understood now. The execution platform stood exactly where she'd fallen, as if history were a circle that could finally be closed. Elara walked through the crowd in chains, and through the true light, she could see their auras. Fear, anger, confusion, hope buried so deep, most didn't recognize it anymore. Miriam was somewhere in that sea of people, surrounded by Lightweaver descendants who'd emerged from hiding after generations of silence. They wore no identifying marks, carried no obvious weapons, but Elara could feel them, pinpricks of light in gathering darkness. Draven stood on the platform like a statue of himself, every inch the tyrant king complying with law and counsel. But his eyes found Elara's, and in that brief connection, she saw the plan, the hope, the apology for what had to happen next. The ceremony began with speeches. Council members droned about justice and protection and the ancient laws. Cassius spoke with perfect sympathy. Such a tragedy, such a necessity, if only there were another way. Elara watched him and saw a predator, counting seconds until the kill. The blood moon climbed higher. Red light washed across the square like spilled wine. Then Cassius made his move. Shadow magic erupted from every corner. Not random, not chaotic, but orchestrated. A ritual prepared over centuries, activated all at once. The Shadow Guards who'd pretended loyalty to Draven turned on the Royal Guards with coordinated precision. Council members in Cassius's pocket stepped forward as one, voices raised in unified declaration, "King Draven is unfit to rule." Cassius walked onto the platform, and with each step, the mask of loyalty crumbled. 200 years of performance ended in a single moment. "You were always too weak," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Too human-loving, too soft." His voice carried across the square, amplified by shadow magic. Seraphina would have ruined everything. All that power wasted on compassion, on seeing the best in people. She would have made vampires equal to humans, destroyed our rightful supremacy. Draven stood frozen, watching his brother confess to fratricide before the entire kingdom. "Yes, I killed your precious daughter." Cassius smiled, "and it was terrible. I've spent 2 centuries turning you into the monster you needed to be, making this kingdom hate you, waiting for the perfect moment to save them from the tyrant I created." Shadow magic exploded from his body. His form shifted, corrupted by dark magic beyond recognition. Tendrils of living darkness writhing from his spine, eyes burning red, humanity abandoned for power. "This kingdom needs a real king," he declared, reaching for the crown. "Strong, uncompromising, willing to do what's necessary." The square erupted into chaos. Civil war broke out instantly. Vampires who'd secretly remained loyal to the true king against those who'd been bought or manipulated, humans caught in the middle, shadow guards cutting through anyone in their path. Draven launched himself toward Alara through the chaos, inhuman speed, barely enough against the tide of Cassius's forces. Cassius's corrupted form towered above the platform, shadow magic lashing out in every direction. His forces were overwhelming the loyal guards, pushing toward total victory. The blood moon reached its apex, and in its crimson light, the true battle for Valinmor's soul began. Ilara stood alone on the platform, while war raged around her. Through the chaos, she watched Cassius cut through defenders, like they were smoke, his corrupted form unstoppable, advancing with terrible purpose. "History repeats," he said, shadow blade forming in his hand, the same blade that had killed Seraphina. "I finish what I started." Draven fought desperately toward the platform, but shadow magic wrapped around him like chains. Miriam's group tried to break through, but were pushed back by shadow guards. No one could reach her in time. The blade pressed against Ilara's throat, cold as absence, and she felt history converging on this single moment. Seraphina had died here. Her mother had died slowly, denied help. Generations of Lightweavers had been systematically murdered. The cycle of darkness seemed inevitable, inescapable. Then she remembered. Draven's patient hands teaching her to focus. Seraphina's courage in the vision, raising her hand in greeting even as death approached. Miriam's fierce love carrying forward despite loss. Her mother's sacrifice, giving everything so Ilara could live. Not victim, warrior. The true light didn't awaken, it exploded. Golden luminescence erupted from her small form like dawn breaking through eternal night. The barrier expanded outward in a wave of pure radiance, washing across the entire square. Shadows solidified, becoming vulnerable. Dark magic burned away like morning mist, and suddenly everyone could see what Ilara saw. Auras blazed visible to every eye. Cassius's corruption was obvious, black veins of shadow magic pulsing through his form, feeding on stolen power, sustained by murder. But the light did more than reveal. It projected truth. Seraphina's murder played out above the square like a vision made manifest. Thousands of witnesses watched Cassius's shadow blade pierce through his niece. Council members' bribes appeared as glowing strings of corruption connecting them to Cassius. Shadow guards saw the dark magic infecting their own souls, the manipulation they hadn't known they'd suffered. The entire kingdom understood betrayal in a single, perfect moment of clarity. Cassius screamed as the light burned into him, his power evaporating like shadow at noon. Draven felt the shadow restraints dissolve and launched himself toward the platform with inhuman speed, every ounce of vampire strength focused on reaching his daughter. No, not his daughter, but the child who'd saved them all. Their hands joined. The power that surged between them was unprecedented. Vampire strength enhanced by true light, darkness balanced by dawn. Draven's nature wasn't evil, Ilara understood. It had never been evil. Just different, powerful, capable of both cruelty and profound protection. Love could exist in darkness. Light could shine through shadow. Together, they channeled the barrier into a focused beam. All that golden power concentrated into a single point. Directed at Cassius, it was judgment and mercy both. The truth he'd spent 2 centuries trying to destroy finally made undeniable. He raised his arms as if he could block dawn itself, shadow magic gathering for one final defense. But light doesn't negotiate with darkness. It simply illuminates, reveals, purifies. The beam struck him like the answer to a question the kingdom had been asking for 200 years. The beam of balanced power met Cassius's shadow magic like dawn, meeting night, and there was never any question which would prevail. Truth versus lies, love versus hate, balance versus corruption. 200 years of accumulated darkness burned away under the combined strength of vampire and lightweaver, father and daughter. Grief transformed into purpose. Cassius fought with desperate fury, throwing every forbidden spell he'd learned, every dark ritual he'd perfected. His corrupted form grew more monstrous with each attack, as if he could become powerful enough to unmake reality itself. In his final desperation, he attempted a spell that would pull everyone into the shadow realm. If he couldn't have the kingdom, no one would. But Ilara's light was an anchor. She held reality in place with sheer will, refusing to let her people fall into darkness. The spell turned back on its caster. Then the true light did something even Miriam hadn't anticipated. It showed Cassius his own soul. He screamed, not from pain, but from recognition. The true light forced him to witness what he'd become. Every murder projected in perfect clarity, every manipulation laid bare. 2 centuries of corruption made undeniable. Seraphina's face appeared in his reflection, her last confused, Uncle Cassius, echoing across his consciousness. Horror crashed through him. Not horror at being caught, but horror at seeing himself truly for the first time in 200 years. The darkness he'd cultivated, the evil he'd justified, the monster he'd become, all of it visible in a single moment of perfect, unbearable clarity. He couldn't bear it, couldn't survive seeing his own soul. Cassius disintegrated from within, consumed not by external force, but by the truth of what he was. His shadow magic collapsed, unraveling across the kingdom like thread pulled from a tapestry. The blood moon broke apart into normal silver moonlight. Shadow guards throughout the square dropped their weapons, released from dark magic control. Many collapsed, crying, realizing what they'd been made to do. Council members who'd been exposed tried to flee but found no escape from the truth everyone had witnessed. Loyal forces secured victory without additional bloodshed. The battle was already over. The square fell silent. Ilara's small body crumpled, power completely exhausted. Draven caught her with inhuman speed, and for the first time in 200 years, he showed emotion publicly. No mask, no calculation, just love, as pure and desperate as any parent's. He cradled her against his chest, checking for breath, for heartbeat. This child who'd saved them all. Miriam reached them moments later, tears streaming down her face. 3 generations united. Grandmother, the king who'd lost a daughter, and the girl who'd broken a curse. None of them had fully understood they were living under. The kingdom watched their tyrant king kneel in the square, holding a small deaf child with infinite gentleness. They saw his face, truly saw it, perhaps for the first time, and recognized grief that had calcified into cruelty, now cracking open into something that might become redemption. Everything had changed. The witnesses knew it, felt it in their bones. The nightmare wasn't just ended, it was understood. And understanding, they were beginning to learn, was the first step toward healing. Dawn broke the morning after the blood moon with ordinary golden light, the first normal sunrise in what felt like lifetimes. The kingdom woke to silence, where there had been shadow, clarity, where there had been fear. Trials began immediately. Cassius's remaining followers were judged not by vengeance, but by fair tribunal, humans and vampires sitting together, weighing evidence, determining truth. The council was restructured with representatives from both peoples. Shadow guards who'd been controlled were offered a choice: exile or redemption through service. Most chose redemption, desperate to atone for actions they'd been manipulated into committing. Draven stood on the castle balcony and addressed his people. Truly addressed them, not as a tyrant issuing decrees, but as a man who'd lost himself to grief and was trying to find his way back. "I let my daughter's death make me cruel," he said, voice carrying across the square. "Every unjust law, every execution, every moment of fear, I am responsible. I became the monster grief wanted me to be." He abolished the bowing protocol, repealed the fear-based decrees, announced Ilara as First Light Guardian, a position of honor, not servitude. The Lightweaver Sanctuary was established in what had been Cassius's quarters, cleansed and transformed. They came slowly at first, then, in increasing numbers, children with golden threads in their eyes, adults who'd hidden their gifts for decades, families who'd thought they were the last. One by one, the order began to rebuild. New laws were drafted: justice instead of fear, protection instead of submission, balance between human and vampire. Where the execution platform had stood, they planted gardens. Miriam became official Lightweaver Elder, teaching a new generation. Ilara trained younger students despite her own youth, including a deaf vampire child who looked at her with desperate hope and saw possibility reflected back. 6 months later, the market square hosted its first festival in 2 centuries, without fear underlying the celebration. Ilara sat at her flower cart, decorated now, honored, no longer hidden in a corner. Children played freely, human and vampire together, their laughter the sound of healing. Draven walked among his people, without ceremony or guards, a revolutionary act that still made some citizens catch their breath. A small human child approached him, offering a flower with shy courage. Draven knelt to her level. The same posture as the execution stance, transformed into gentleness. He accepted the flower and smiled, an expression his face had forgotten how to make. Across the square, Ilara watched through her true light vision. His aura glowed gold instead of grief blue. Finally, at peace. Miriam stood beside her, aged but content. The cycle was broken. Ilara's hands moved in the sign language the king had learned for her. "You're still the king." Draven signed back across the crowded square. "You made me remember how to be human." The castle behind them had transformed from oppressive fortress to beacon. Lightweaver children were visible in the windows. Gardens bloomed everywhere, the grey kingdom finding color again. The camera pulled back, showing the whole transformed kingdom. A small deaf girl who couldn't bow had taught an ancient king how to rise. And in teaching him to rise, she'd lifted an entire kingdom from darkness. Ilara returned to arranging flowers, the same action as the story's beginning, but everything different. The true light glowed gently in her eyes. She was the bridge between worlds, between light and shadow, between what was and what could be. And that was enough.